Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this special town hall meeting hosted by the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Mike Brennan, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the RAIC. Before we proceed, I'd like to take a moment on behalf of the RAIC to acknowledge the land on which we work, study, and live. Since this event is being held virtually, a singular land acknowledgement does not capture the full breadth of our members across Canada and around the world. As the RAC office is located in Ottawa, we acknowledge the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We honor the rich history, culture, and contributions of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. Thank you for joining me in this acknowledgement. Please feel free to place your land acknowledgements if the chat is enabled. As you know, today's discussion centers around an important topic, the updated procurement policy on official languages and contracting, specifically PN 48R2, presented by Public Services and Procurement Canada, or PSPC. This session provides a unique opportunity for you, our valued RAC members, to deepen your understanding of the updated policy and its implications for federal project delivery and your own practices. The changes being proposed could significantly impact how we engage the federal contracting, and it's crucial that we all stay informed and proactive in adapting to these new requirements. We are fortunate to have PSPC with us today, who will guide us through the rationale behind the updates and the key changes being introduced. After their presentation, we'll have a dedicated Q&A session where you can pose your questions directly to them by using the Q&A feature within the Zoom meeting platform. I encourage you to take full advantage of this opportunity to engage and clarify any uncertainties you might have. Furthermore, I want to remind you that public consultation on PN 48R2 is currently open. I strongly encourage you to download and review the policy documents and share your feedback with PSPC. Your insights are invaluable, and your participation in this process will ensure our collective voice is heard. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Tanay Patel from Public Services and Procurement Canada. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate having the opportunity to be here on behalf of PSPC. My name is Tanay Patel. I am the manager within the strategic policy sector of acquisitions program within Public Services and Procurement Canada. I'm just going to make sure that the slide presentation is viewable in full screen. Mike, you're able to see the slideshow?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on were the objectives of our policy. So the prime objective of our policy is to meet our obligation under the Official Languages Act to serve and communicate with the public as part of our procurement process. That pertains to anything that we publish online and all communications. We want to ensure that whenever we're communicating with suppliers, we're doing so in the language of their choice. And another important objective is to ensure that the guidance that we provide is clear and that it enhances our client service while complying with our official language obligations. And of course, you'll see in the third bullet, we certainly emphasize publications. So that would be any tender documents that we're publishing online. They have to be published in both English and French. And that English and French content, it has to be of equal quality. And we always have to ensure that anything that we publish, it's always published at the same time to ensure that language rights are truly reflected under the spirit and intent of the Official Languages Act. With regard to the policy itself, one thing that's very important to be clear on is that our policy, it's not directed at members of the public or suppliers. It's really an internal policy. It's a policy that's directed at our own buyers who purchase goods, services, and real property on behalf of our client departments and agencies. It's not a policy that is directed at suppliers specifically. Nevertheless, architects, engineers, and geoscientists, they are implicated in the sense that when we do source professionally sealed documents from these professionals for use in tender requirements, knowing that we have official languages rules to follow, that is sort of where you all come into play, and it's why we're very glad to be speaking with you today. Just a little bit of background. So we did originally put out a policy in December of 2022, and that it came into force in May. Sorry, we put it out in December of 2021, and it came into force in May, and that was to align with government-wide policy changes. And specifically, back in the day, we did not have to publish documents online. As an example, certain documents like professionally sealed documents, architectural drawings, we used to be able to just publish them in their original language, and everything else we would publish in English and French. However, we've taken a more broader and stricter interpretation of the law when it comes to publication. We're no longer allowed to deviate from that overarching rule. If we are publishing anything online, it has to be in both English and French. So basically, in a nutshell, PN 48R1, that was the prime objective of that policy. And there were also policy changes government-wide within the Treasury Board Secretariat that also enshrined that same rule when it came to publications. And in fact, what I'm just going to skip actually over to an annex. And don't worry, folks, we will ensure that you all have access to this deck after the presentation. So we'll provide this deck to RAIC so that it can be available to be accessed and downloaded. But that having been said, we'll include any links to current and discontinued policies. So that will be at your fingertips should you be interested in perusing what current and previous policy indicated. So sorry, I'm just going to skip back to the other slide that I had up. There we are. And then basically we did include some interim guidance simply because there were some questions and issues that we needed to resolve with regard to the treatment of sealed documents. So, meanwhile, over the last 2 years, we have been working very diligently on a much more comprehensive policy than what was previously published in 2022. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And the policy that we're talking about today that we're consulting on, it is a draft policy. So the policy that we're going to be speaking to, it has not yet come into force. So with regard to the policy that we have recently drafted, here are some of the highlights. So, relative to the policy that we had before, one thing that you'll observe when we walk through the policy, we do have a lot of guidance on how to source and deal with professionally sealed documents. So we have very detailed instructions for how to source and tender with sealed documents for the professions of architecture, engineering, and geoscience. And we also basically cover and interpret all of the acts and regulations for every province and territory in every one of those professions. And another thing that we'd like to do, and again, we haven't included it in the policy itself, but we will be adding a summary table of all of the regulations governing the translation of sealed documents. And another thing that you'll see within the policy itself is that the buyers to whom the policy is directed, we're also providing them advice on how to support sourcing strategies to ensure that we're not undermining industry competitiveness. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But that certainly is one of the highlights that we have in this current policy. And then in addition to that, there are some other sections, again, not specifically, not as pertinent to perhaps this audience, but we do have more information and just in terms of, more clarity on, who's responsible for what in the realm of, PSPC and our client buyers. And then we also have some information on how to handle the publication and translation of international specifications and standards. So I'll have a chance to show you some examples in terms of what I mean when I say that as we walk through the policy. Another thing that we wanted to mention as well in terms of how we're consulting, we are consulting online. So you did see a link to the policy that we have up. That is posted on our tendering website, Canada Buys. We've also promoted this engagement through LinkedIn, X, and Canada Buys, which is again our portal for tendering requirements on the part of the Government of Canada. And we've also announced this policy internally to our buyers within acquisitions program, and we've announced this draft policy in the consultations to client departments and agencies. And We've also engaged the Federal Industry Real Property Advisory Council, of which RAIC is a part. And then, of course, we've also engaged in targeted outreach. So we have approached the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, Engineers Canada, Geoscientists Canada, and we've also written to all of the provincial, territorial, and territorial regulatory bodies for the professions of engineering, geoscience, and architecture with specific questions. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about when we get into the policy itself. Of course, when you see the online invitation to provide feedback, we are inviting anyone, including members of the public, to share their thoughts on the draft policy. So again, I'll actually take you through the process of going online and downloading the policy and providing feedback. And we just wanted to let you know that we are looking at every feedback that we receive via email. And of course, if you are members of RAIC or if you are licensed architects, we certainly, would encourage you to share feedback with RAIC in addition to ourselves, simply because, when you send your feedback to us, obviously we treat it in accordance with the Privacy Act. So, we're not in a position to, share what you share with us. So that having been said, if there are concerns that you want to convey to RAIC, we certainly encourage you to share your thoughts with them directly as well. And sorry, I'm just going to, there we go. So I actually have this walkthrough of PN48R2 slide, so I'm going to dive into that. Another thing that I just wanted to draw your attention to, I don't know, yes, so you can see this slide here. So again, one thing that I just want to be very cautious on, and again, this is a slide that's in the annex of our presentation. Again, we know that architects and engineers and geoscientists, they're all different professions. They all have their own distinct rules. And that having been said, what I'm about to share on the slide, I don't want to say that it's necessarily pertinent to the practice of architecture, but nevertheless, there may be some parallels that, from a professional standpoint, you may be able to draw, from some of the take homes that we received from the Association of Consulting and Engineering Companies. So that having been said, we're not just engaged with architects, we are engaged with the engineering and geoscientist community. And that having been said, we did learn some valuable feedback from them. They had actually provided a detailed industry impact survey on our previous policy, PN48R1. And we did want to share some of the take homes that they themselves have also published. And that was, from the engineering standpoint, a lot of the engineers were concerned about a lack of bilingual capacity in the engineering community, especially for small and medium-sized firms, and especially for firms located in predominantly unilingual regions. That would include certainly the Western prairie provinces, as an example, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and certainly others. And of course, one challenge that I'm sure will resonate more than anything is that, for a lot of the engineers, again, how do they navigate any requirements or any requests that we have from the Government of Canada, with respect to their own rules in terms of what they're allowed to prepare, seal, and stamp. And at least in the engineering world, at least for some jurisdictions, there are rules, there are provisions that, explicitly allow for documents to be translated and for those translated sealed documents to also be sealed. Sorry, I probably didn't say that super well. But that having been said, we're not saying that's necessarily reflective of the reality in the architectural world, but nevertheless, there is that struggle that the engineering and geoscience communities face, in terms of how do they reconcile what we as the Government of Canada are asking for, and vis-a-vis their own rules that they have to follow, which are extremely important, as we all know. And of course, when it comes to translating, how does this impact, professionals when it comes to contractor or professional liability? This has also been, a tremendous concern. And of course, another thing that came out in the survey were, increased costs, which ultimately, have to be absorbed by the Crown. And of course, anytime that you are having to translate, professionally sealed documents, that takes time, or, when it can be done. And of course, this does, it can and often does, result in delays or potentially backlogs when especially when you're talking about construction projects and the like. So again, it's not necessarily 100% pertinent to your world, but we did feel like it was valuable insight from that profession. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into a walkthrough of our policy. And first, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up the website where you can download the policy. So I'll actually have that on screen if you just give me one moment. So here we go. Oh, sorry, I have the wrong document here. My apologies. I have too many windows open. All right, let me just see here. This is the one that I'm looking for. Sorry, my apologies, folks. Okay, here it is. So the link that you would have received in the RAIC invitation, or that's on the website now, it points you to this website on Canada Buys. And here you will see, and this is our tendering website. So this is where all our tender opportunities appear. You'll actually see our request for information. That's what it's branded as. And it says share your thoughts, updated a policy on official languages. And within the description, we provide a little information, some information about the consultation itself. We speak to the highlights of the policy, and then we also provide some brief instruction on how to participate. So what you do is you simply download the policy and you send us an email. And of course, we have one of those nice long convoluted email addresses that's in both English and French, but so long as you just copy and paste the whole thing, we should get the email. And basically what we indicate here is that we'll review any feedback that you send to us via email. And we cannot guarantee that all feedback will be incorporated as changes into the policy, but we certainly will we'll look and consider everything that we see. And in some cases we may follow up and we may request clarification, but we can't guarantee that we will follow up with everyone, simply because we're a very small team, and we'll certainly do our best. But if there is something that gets our attention and that would warrant further unpacking on our part, we'll certainly be available, and we certainly will be engaging with RAIC whenever we receive their feedback. So be assured of that. And then there is a privacy notice, just in terms of what to expect when with the information that you submit. So I'll invite you to read all of that. And then we'll go into the bidding details tab, and this is where you can download the policy. So right now we're getting close to about 450 downloads. It is quite a popular policy. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on the link. So you are going to see that originally we published the policy in July. So in English, there is a document here, and there's a French document. But what I'm going to do is we had to make a couple of tweaks and updates to the documents. So I'll be clicking on this amendment link. So that's the document that I would recommend anyone else opens up. And just going to wait. It'll take a couple of seconds. There's the file. I'm going to go ahead and open that. So now we actually have the policy document open. Sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Mike, could you just remind me, how much time did I have before we had to get into the questions and answers?
We're going to start the Q&A at 1:35.
Wonderful.
Possible. And we've got maybe a bit of a 10-minute buffer at around 1:50.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'll make sure that I pace myself accordingly.
No worries.
And of course, if there are questions on any specific provisions, we can certainly field those as well. So again, we did have to post some minor updates, or some updates. So basically, we did provide a summary at the outset on what the changes were in the name of transparency, and we've also tracked those specific little tweaks and updates throughout the document. So at the beginning of the policy, again, we summarize, again, this is really for acquisitions program, which is the function within PSPC, Public Services and Procurement Canada, that undertakes procurement on behalf of departments and agencies. So again, the policy is really directed at our buyers and as well as our clients. And basically we provide an overview in terms of what the policy covers. And we've Basically, relative to PN 48R1, our previous policy document, we've just provided a summary of the new sections that we've either included or replaced. And then further down below, we are also introducing a term, a clause that we can use in solicitations. So I'll have a chance to show you the clause as well that we are proposing to introduce. Then we also have contact information, but this is more for the buyers themselves. There is another contact email address for external stakeholders as well. So we've included contact information for people with questions on the policy once it is officially promulgated. And that having been said, the first portion of the policy is really dedicated to speaking to our our overarching obligations under the Official Languages Act. So basically, you will see that the Act, we take it very seriously. The Official Languages Act, it's really considered, it is often considered to be quasi-constitutional in status because the law itself, it does uphold certain rights certain language rights within our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So again, it's a very, very important law. And I would even argue that, in terms of its weight relative to other federal legislation, apart from the Canadian Human Rights Act, it is given quite a hefty degree of precedence. And I'm not a legal scholar or a lawyer myself, but I would also say that, if anything under, anything that goes to court with respect to the Official Languages Act, if there is anything argued in the court, the courts have been known to interpret that law very, very broadly and yet very rigidly as well. So something to bear in mind in that regard. And at the outset of our policy, we provide just to client departments. We reference, how they are, obligated to define official languages requirements in contracts. So our client departments, they're the ones who have to provide technical specifications and definitions to us. So, and I'll get into that a little bit more later on in the document. But that having been said, we do provide some information on, how to help clients plan and translate their documents that are intended for publication. And this pertains to documents in general. So there's lots of things like statements of work, and any types of specifications. They don't even have to be prepared by professionals. They could be for things like office supplies, but basically, if anything that we're documenting and publishing online as part of a requirement, again, everything has to be in English and French. So again, a lot of our rules pertain to, that help clients put together, what they need to help us tender requirements on, competitively and online. And that having been said, quite often when we are, putting together requests for proposal or tender requirements, we're not just preparing our own specifications. We often rely on international standards. And sometimes with regard to these international standards, we don't necessarily repeat them or regurgitate them in our solicitations. We often incorporate them by reference. So as an example, sometimes we will reference United States military standards. Often you'll hear to them referred to as mil-spec. And in those cases, these are standards that are not prepared by or on behalf of the government of Canada. They are American standards. So, in some cases, we don't have a right or necessarily an obligation to, post certain standards in French simply because they're not ours to rely on. But nevertheless, for certain types of military equipment or goods, it may be the only way to describe or articulate a requirement as an example for tanks or jeeps. Ergo, we can reference these standards, and often, sometimes we may have to just reference the English standard as being the only available standard. So that having been said, we explore how to address things like ISO, the United States, and also NATO. And in some cases, there are international organizations whose standards we leverage that have standards available in both languages. So NATO being an example for some standards, as well as ISO, because they are international organizations. And again, a lot of them do have standards in both English and French. So that is also a benefit to us when we invoke those standards in defining requirements. And then within here, we actually get into the rules for publishing notices and tender documents. So we're very clear that there are no exceptions anytime we are publishing anything online as part of a tender call. Everything has to be in English and French. And again, we do not make any distinction between the nature of the documents anymore. And then another thing to mention as well is that tendering from supplier lists, in some instances, what we do often is we will advertise a requirement online and we'll invite suppliers to become part of a list. In other words, we would pre-qualify suppliers. It's a strategy that we employ very often, especially under supply arrangements, if ever you've had to respond to those in the past. And that having been said, we still treat suppliers that are qualified under a list as members of the public. So in essence, when we are tendering with suppliers on a list, we need to ensure that we're communicating with them in the language of their preference. So again, we speak to how to do that within this section. And another important component is that, and actually I'll get into this later, but whenever we're managing contracts, if there are deliverables that, if there's anything that we're working on that has to be prepared in English and French, like as an example, if anyway, so actually, you know what, I'm not going to get into that example specifically, but I'll address any questions if there are any. Another thing that I've added here is we've included some references to other government policy and resources. So we have the Treasury Board Secretariat, some of their policy. We also have the Commissioner of Official Languages. So they are the oversight mechanism for the government to ensure that we are following the spirit and letter of the Official Languages Act. And that having been said, they have a mandate to oversee complaints when people have concerns if their language rights are not being read. So we certainly encourage any member of the public to avail themselves of the resources that the Commissioner's office offers. This here actually doesn't pertain specifically to language, so I'm just going to actually skip past that. There was a provision that we had to remove. Here's another component here. It's a matrix of responsibility. I'm not going to get into it too much, but this is really a delineation of, our client departments, what they have to prepare, getting ready for a public solicitation relative to what we as the common service provider for procurement have to prepare. It's a little bit of inside baseball. Again, if there are any questions on this section, I'm certainly happy to address that, but it really gets into, who's responsible for doing what when we're preparing solicitations. So I won't get into that too much. Really, where the meat and the essence of what we'd like to speak to you is really this section, and that is basically what to do when we are dealing with professionally sealed documents. And basically what we've done is we've provided our buyers, and we've also provided, and this is also a very useful resource, because again, we don't just have buyers, contracting officers, we also have a lot of architectural, engineering, and geoscience professionals within the government who are often our clients. So basically, we're providing guidance for both the buyers as well as these professional clients, basically guidance on basically how to source and tender with professionally sealed documents vis-a-vis the official languages rules. And one of the first things that we do provide is just a general overview of, what is a professional seal. So again, I won't get into that here, but again, it is intended to be generic and cover off the respective professions that are regulated, including the ones that I referenced before. And then we have some general principles. So when we say that professionally sealed documents, when they are published, we do say that they have to be, when we say issued for tender, I think we might try and introduce another synonym, but what we're trying to say now is that we're now requiring that these documents be tender ready. So in other words, we want to make sure that any documents, if we're publishing them online, if they're sealed, they have to be tender ready, and they have to be of truly equal quality. So in other words, if we're putting up English documents, that are prepared by, as an example, an engineer, and they're sealed, we have to make sure the same is done for the French sealed documents. And basically they have to be, basically considered equal quality or equivalence. So it's basically something that is different from PN 48R1, and we're being very explicit in this regard within this policy. And obviously, we certainly acknowledge that not all provinces and territories permit that documents are translated. So we certainly acknowledge and mention that, and certainly we say that when professionally sealed documents are only available in one official languages, we specify that they must not be published, and we basically refer to an alternative means of how to basically tender real property construction requirements, given that we cannot publish, given that there will be examples when we can't publish documents. But another important component here, and again, this is very important to this audience, is how we now source professionally sealed documents. So we do try and provide buyers guidance. So we say that some provinces and territories, they may permit tender-ready translations of professionally sealed documents. However, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, they may have their own respective rules for how that's done and how that's carried out. And basically, we go on further to say that, well, where the translations are permitted, some jurisdictions allow one professional to do everything. So in other words, in some cases, depending on where the rules are and depending on what province you're in, you may have to be the author of the original documents. So in other words, if you're the engineer that originally prepared the documents, you may be the only person that's allowed to translate those documents. In some cases, there are jurisdictions that may allow a third party to be involved in the translation, but they may have very strict and specific rules. They may say that, the engineer who's doing the translation must also be licensed in the province. They must be proficient in the language. Again, I don't want to misinterpret any rules, but because as you're going to see, we've actually documented all the rules for every province and territory within the document itself, within the policy itself. And then and we actually get into, again, sourcing strategies. So in essence, if people are able to source documents, and basically original documents and source the translation separately, we kind of get into the pros and cons of basically sourcing documents, because obviously if you try and source documents from a single supplier, as an example, an architect, if you want to get English and French steel documents from an engineer, well, that means that the engineer is not going to, there are not going to be that many engineers that can provide service to you in English and French. And obviously that has, potentially a negative impact on the industry as a whole, because if we're trying to get everything at once from one engineer, yes, there may be some advantages to doing that, but there are also disadvantages because, again, a lot of engineers may not be able to work in both languages. So we certainly recognize that even when we're allowed to source documents, there are consequences for the way in which we source documents. So we want to provide some insight and some advice and guidance to the buyers as considerations for how to source these documents to minimize the impact on industry competitiveness. I don't know if that resonates, but I'll certainly be happy to speak to that topic if anyone has questions. And obviously, we do have an alternative approach, again, if documents can't be sealed. And then obviously we have a section on how to tender real property construction requirements. So basically, if you only have documents that are available in one language, we do have one suggestion where you can establish a pre-qualified list. We are going to introduce some other options as well. So as an example, one strategy might be that rather than publish sealed documents online, one thing that we can do is we can post an RFP or a request for proposal online, and we can basically indicate in a solicitation that you would have to contact us for any sealed documents. So you would have to contact the buyer or the contracting officer to obtain to receive sealed documents. And that having been said, one thing that we'll do is that if sealed documents are only available in one language, we're going to include a clause in solicitations, or we can include a clause in solicitations, and that's to warn, as an example, construction firms that ahead of time they'll know that, in some cases where the regulation or law does not permit us to translate documents, we want to let construction companies know up front that, in this particular solicitation, we weren't allowed to get our documents in English or French. Therefore, be warned, certain documents you're only going to get in their original language or in their one language that they were prepared in. So that is another feature that we've included in the policy, is again a clause that we can use for tendering activities when there are sealed documents only available in one language. And then last but not least, sorry, I know we're running a little bit over time, but I'm just going to jump into some examples of rules. So what we've done is we've actually gone in and we've actually reached out to every provincial and territorial regulatory body. So as an example, the Alberta Association of Architects, we've reached out to them and we wanted to confirm with them and with all of these regulatory bodies, have we interpreted their rules correctly? And I'll just jump into an example here. We have Alberta. So for architects licensed in Alberta, we've basically indicated that contracting officers can only source sealed documents in their original language. And basically, we're trying to interpret the rules or the lack thereof. We've indicated that the Alberta Association of Architects does not prescribe rules that allow, basically tender-ready translations of professionally sealed documents. And again, we don't know whether, silence on that notion of translation, whether that means someone is not allowed to do something or whether they're allowed to do something. But what we've gone and done is that if no one's spoken to translation in their rules, we've assumed that it's not allowed. And again, we've gone out to every individual regulatory body to confirm our understanding with them. And I think the important thing to emphasize here is we're not here to tell the regulatory bodies and the provinces and territories what their rules are. We want to confirm from them what their rules are so we can align with the laws and regulations of the provinces and territories. And again, we'll see some examples for engineers, geoscientists across every province and territory. And again, we are going to be vetting that extensively with all of these regulatory bodies, but all of that to say, I think that's what I had to mention in a nutshell. I think that was everything that I had, in the way of my policy walkthrough. Maybe Mike, I will turn it over to you if there are questions. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Tanae. And Danielle Catley is joining us today, and she will be fielding any questions. And we have 2 questions thus far in the Q&A. And so, Danielle, I'll just pass that off to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanae. Thank you, Mike. So as Mike has mentioned, we have 2 questions here in the chat from anonymous attendees. So I'll read them out, but everyone, if you open the Q&A feature, you'll be able to read them on your own as well. So the first question is, downloading bilingual requirement and costs to consultants has the unintended result of prejudicing large national firms over local regional firms that may not have that capacity. Is it possible for the Crown to undertake the translation role to help level this asymmetry?
It's a great question, and thank you very much for that. And it was something that I hope I had addressed somewhat, but it certainly warrants re-emphasizing. But again, if there is an opportunity, if the rules allow for us to find different means of translating documents, it's certainly something that we want to encourage our buyers to do, in the sense that we certainly want to minimize, again, the impacts on competition, knowing that there are a lot of professionals that cannot undertake the role of translating documents themselves. And again, even when people are proficient, again, we understand too that there is liability, both professional and contractual liability that comes into play. And we certainly know, again, I don't want to speak to necessarily architects, in general, but I'll speak to all professionals. This is not something that even engineers that are, capable of speaking in French, they may not be comfortable working in French, or, vice versa, or, like if a Francophone, is capable of working in English, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to seal documents in English. So that having been said, where rules allow for Canada to find other means of translating documents, if we need to engage other firms that have the professional capacity to translate documents, I think that is something that we should encourage and among our buyer community. But But that having been said, we really need to ensure that we're following the rules and whether or not, you know, the regulations allow for that to happen. So I don't know if that answers the question, but thank you very much for that. I hope it does.
Thank you, Tanae. The next question. Does the policy extend to translation of product information by suppliers that may be referenced in specifications? Consultants are not well placed to undertake translation of copyright materials by suppliers.
Yes, this is a wonderful question. Thank you very much. So regarding liability for unilingual professionals, so as an example, if someone prepares what's the word? If they're preparing a seal like a sealed drawing in English, and basically we go to another professional to have the documents prepared in French. Basically, whoever prepared the original document, if they were not involved in the translation, they would only be liable or accountable for the work that they themselves had prepared. And typically in our contracts, most all of our contracts will have basically a section that says translation of written material. And one thing that we can do is we can even add the clause to the policy or pronounce it in the policy. But basically what that clause says is, and it explicitly says that, you know, if we basically secure the right to translate something. So in our contracts, we will basically, you know, mention that, hey, we have the right to translate our deliverables, and any deliverables that we, Canada, translate that are submitted to us by a professional, we are responsible for the translation and any errors that result, and we would be liable for any translation errors. Certainly, if the you know, the original professional had no involvement in the translation, you know, they would only be they would not be liable for the translation. They would only be liable or accountable for the work that they themselves had produced. I don't know if that is clear.
Thank you, Tanae. I'm actually just wondering if you were answering this third question regarding liability and maybe not the second question, or
I'm sorry about that.
perhaps I'm confused.
Okay. Sorry, you know what? It's probably because I'm looking at the chat. So there's one that said regarding liability if a unilingual professional seals a package. That's the question that I had responded to.
Perfect. So if you don't mind, in the answer section, there's the second
Yes.
question around does the policy extend to translation of product information by suppliers that may be referenced in specifications? Consultants are not well placed to undertake translation of copyright material by suppliers.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm not seeing that one. My apologies.
No worries. It's just in the answered section of the Q&A.
Okay,
So
okay.
I'll read again a bit slow, maybe
Okay.
slowly. Does the policy extend to translation of product information by suppliers that may be referenced in specifications? Consultants are not well placed to undertake translation of copyright material by suppliers.
Translation of product information by suppliers. Like, again, this doesn't necessarily pertain to, I'm going to speak to this in more of a generic fashion, but I presume this doesn't necessarily apply to professionally sealed documents. But if I were to just interpret this more generally, if this is something that is being published online, then basically it has to appear in both official languages. So if there is product information that we're publishing by a supplier, and if it was given to us in English, well, we would also need to publish that information in French. And like, I guess when it comes to copyright, obviously, it's a little bit tricky in that regard, but like, I certainly understand that, you know, copyright, we have to be very mindful that, you know, we're not reproducing or doing things. Obviously, I understand intellectual property law is very important, but again, for the most part, I will say that, you know, as far as the publication rule is concerned, if it is in French or, you know, sorry, if it's being published online, there are no exceptions to that rule. I think I will just leave it at that.
Thank you, Tanae. We have another question here from Robert Martin. Any advanced thoughts about Indigenous languages in certain regions?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. And I'm just actually going to scroll up to a particular section within our policy here, and I'm so glad this question came up. So one thing that I wanted to draw to your attention, and again, it sort of indirectly may address the question, but obviously, Nunavut, there's lots of projects that we have in Nunavut, and again, especially when it comes to areas that have treaty obligations, we obviously need to ensure that those treaty obligations are respected. And that having been said, if there are requirements that involve Indigenous languages, that is also extremely important, and that is something that we certainly need to follow. And again, I provide the example of Nunavut, that obviously within the territory of Nunavut, they do recognize Inuktitut and Inuinnaqtun. They both recognize both of those as official languages. So that having been said, if those languages are involved in a project, again, I don't want to speak on specific projects, but obviously there certainly is consideration for Indigenous languages, and that having been said, that may be project dependent, and while the policy doesn't necessarily cover that specific topic in depth, from a project standpoint, there's certainly nothing in our policy that would prevent departments and agencies from ensuring that Indigenous language obligations are met. So we certainly are not putting up barriers to ensure, to meeting Indigenous language obligations. But, this is something that we can take back if there's anything that we can do to strengthen our commitment to Indigenous languages, when they pertain to specific requirements.
Thank you. We have another question here from Alejandro Manvich. Following up on the first question, I read PN 482 differently. Annex B, as amended, appears to require bilingual sealed documents in all provinces where the rules allow it. That is, for engineering documents in BC, Ontario, New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland, irrespective of how many consultants have that capacity, the demand for bilingual sealed documents in said jurisdiction or the detrimental effect on competitiveness. Is this correct? And if so, why is the government requiring translation of engineering sealed documents across the board in those 5 provinces? And how will it mitigate the inevitable impact on competition?
So I think to answer that question, and again, I appreciate the question. Again, it's when the documents are published that we are requiring that they be translated. Will they necessarily be translated in every instance? Not necessarily. Sometimes when we're dealing with, only one firm, like, in sole source requirements, again, will we necessarily need to publish or prepare bid documents in both languages? And the other point that I would want to emphasize too here is that I think obviously we'll do what we can to mitigate any impacts on industry. If there is anything that we can do to mitigate the impacts, we certainly will explore that. But at the end of the day, the law is the law, and we do have to follow it. Again, this is a quasi-constitutional Official Languages Act. But that having been said, if there is anything that we can do to mitigate any impacts on industry, that's allowable by law, we're certainly willing to explore whatever it is we can. And that having been said, one of those strategies, again, when we're dealing with Ontario, or as an example, for engineers that are, as an example, that do allow for translations to be done, this is where we can basically take on the approach that you can still, advocate for sourcing documents in one language, and maybe engaging in separate firms to take care of the translations to again minimize that industry competitiveness impact.
Thank you. Another question here from Robert Martin. Can you comment on timing of impacts and implications? Example, if a package goes out to the street and then a bidder asks for translated material, the tender timing can be significantly impacted while material is translated.
Yes. So, and actually, this is a great point. Sorry, another great question. I'm just going to actually look here. This is a really good one. Sorry, and I'm actually going to point to the policy here. So one thing, and I should have actually highlighted this, but basically in the eyes of the official languages law, sorry, the act, one thing that we've mentioned here is when it comes to complying with the Official Languages Act, the one thing that we know is that cost, time, and level of effort are not valid considerations in complying with the law itself. And that basically the onus is on the government to plan our requirements and related projects accordingly. And that having been said, I'm not saying that I have all of the answers to that question, but that having been said, that is a challenge, obviously, certainly for both suppliers as well as the government. And obviously, if there's anything that we can do in the way of workarounds that are acceptable within the law and that don't undermine competitiveness, obviously, we are willing to explore anything that we can do to offset some of the, potential impacts on project timelines. But I'm not going to lie, but there are challenges that we also recognize, on the part of the government.
Thank you, Tane. Just to let you know, we've got about 2.5 minutes left for questions and answers, and I see we have 3 in the chat right now remaining. I will say that if anybody has questions that they would like to put into the chat now, we would be happy to take them away and respond in writing to those questions. If you just leave your email address in the chat box, that would be great so that we can respond. Thanks. Go ahead, Tane.
Thank you. Danielle, if there are any questions you'd like to wrap up that are on screen, I'll be glad to field those.
Yes, perfect. And just a point of clarification for those questions that we can't answer, those who do anonymous attendee as their name, if you want to put your full name, we actually have your email address on file from your registration. So we'll be able to contact you if you don't want to share your personal email through this chat. But the next question here is, do published documents include change orders, RFIs, minutes, certificates during construction?
So if they are published online, and I wasn't familiar with change orders necessarily being published online, but if the change orders in full are published anywhere online, then yes, they would have to be in both English and French. Like if they are published and basically made available to members of the public. I'm just sort of interpreting the law fairly narrowly. I may not have all the nuances and ins and outs of that, but that's certainly a question I can take back just to verify I understand the context of the question clearly. But again, if anything is published, it has to be in both English and French.
Thank you. As a general practice, can translation be a flow-through disbursement when, if required? This would even the playing field for bilingual and non-bilingual practitioners.
A flow-through disbursement. When, if required, this would even the playing field for non-flow-through disbursement. I'm trying to understand what that means. I apologize. I don't quite understand exactly what that refers to, but again, I guess what I would sort of maybe go back to is if there is a way for the government to undertake the translation itself, either by taking it on or outsourcing that translation, that is certainly something that we would certainly do. So again, we'll if we're getting those questions from you, Danielle, in writing, I'll make sure that I understand what is meant by flow through disbursement, in case that the individual is referring to something specific that I'm simply not aware of.
I think Mr.
Yes.
Murray is actually saying that the consultant does not have to. For example, the consultant does not have to carry out translation costs.
Oh, absolutely. And I think like another point to mention here is that if we are asking for things to be translated, obviously those costs are going to be passed back onto the government. Certainly, if we're asking for documents to be prepared in English and French, obviously we know that's going to cost more money. So either we're going to be eating those costs, or like we're going to be eating those costs one way or another. That having been said, if we're going to someone else to have those things translated, that cost is on us because it's something that we require.
We might have time for one more question, or Does that work
There was
for
one,
Janae and
and I
Mike?
certainly would be available.
Okay. So here we have, thank you for the presentation. Question 1, does the policy apply only to final versions of documents? Example, final reports, final contract documents issued for tender, etc. And question 2, can translation be covered as separate cost line items, and can they be treated as disbursements?
I certainly think that again, if things are published online, then they must be in English and French. Yeah, so they are published, they have to be in English and French, no exceptions on that front. And then again, with regard to costing things separately as disbursements, again, it would depend on how presumably a contract is structured, but obviously when requirements are put together, and if we are asking for translation items that are distinct from basically original documents, if we are sourcing everything together, then presumably I think that does certainly make sense that we are requesting that things be costed separately. I think that would be valuable to us as well as a government. And again, that's presuming that we are sourcing directly from one profession or firm, if you will.
Great. Okay, well, that's fantastic. I really appreciate that. I guess I'll just provide some quick closing remarks and just thank everybody for joining us today for this important discussion on the updated procurement policy on official languages and contracting, specifically the PN 48R2. We appreciate valuable insights shared by Tanae today, so thank you again, Tanae. Today's session has highlighted, I guess, some significant changes and implications for our engagement with federal contracting, and it's crucial that we all take the information shared today, reflect on how these updates will impact our practices and project delivery. I highly encourage everyone, you all, to actively participate in the public consultation processes. Send your feedback in. Your feedback is essential in shaping the policies that affect our profession. I think together we can ensure that our collective voice is heard. Again, I'd like to once again thank you for your engagement and commitment to this vital dialogue, and we do look forward to seeing you at our future events. I'm wishing everybody a wonderful day and a great balance to your week.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Brennan.
Thank you all. Take care.
Take care.